The folks at Byron Seeds believe organic requires a different perspective, plan, and approach. Organic isn't simply a different type of product or even a different way of farming. It's a different way of thinking, planning, commitment. It's a different philosophy on how to feed the world. Many won't understand, but the people at Byron Seeds do. We're owned by organic dairy farmers. We not only have the product, but we plan, manage, and execute organic. We speak your language, we share your struggles, and we laud your successes. Organic isn't a way of doing business, it's a community. We learn from each other. We're in this together. We'd be glad to talk cropping plans, management systems, the road to profitability. We understand what you're trying to do. We're farmers just like you. Visit us at byronseeds.net or give us a call at 800-801-3596. And thanks to Byron Seeds. Save yourself some money next spring and improve your soil health naturally with Soil Biotics Soil Boost. This is a dry, raw humic product that is broadcast post-harvest. Soil Boost will work for you throughout the winter months to create a looser soil and improve water infiltration and retention. Soil Boost helps to balance soil pH levels and increase nutrient retention so fewer inputs are needed. Make sure to also ask about new SB Digester Organic 301. This is an organic crop residue digester that is a combination of organic nitrogen and microbials. SB Digester Organic 301 will help break down wet residue and return nutrients to the soil for your next crop. Call the office at 815-929-1752 or inquire at soilbiotics.com.
You're listening to Rooted in Organic Podcast. I'm Mike Klein, and along with Brian Wood, today we are sitting down with Eric Beiler. He is a dairy farmer from Croghan, New York. Eric has a long history in organic dairy and was on our podcast doing regional updates a couple of years ago. Today we'd like to dig into his farming operation a little bit more and learn more about you, Eric. So thank you so much for joining us.
Sure, Mike. Good to be here. So I started farming, or I guess was born onto a farm in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and a lot of my life has been farming or agriculture. So my father was not raised on a farm. He was when he was real young, but then his later years he wasn't raised on a farm. So he ended up getting into dairying after doing construction and building in Alaska several years. They moved back home, him and my mom, to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and they decided they wanted to raise a family on a farm. So I think that in some ways that kind of was different than some of these farms that were generation after generation of farm. He didn't have much to start, and I think he looked at things differently. In some ways, I think it was good because you don't have these bad habits built. Like he thought outside the box. And I've seen this with another the dairyman I worked for. Even myself growing up on a farm, I think about things a certain way. And the dairyman I worked for later on, you'll hear about him. He also had no background in farming and stepped into dairy. And so just made for, I think, a little different dynamic sometimes in farming. And what I saw. So anyway, so we started renting a farm. They didn't start with a lot. They bought some cows. My mom and dad rented a farm in Lancaster for 3 years, and then we rented a second farm, which we were planning to buy. However, when that farm came up for sale, it was more than we were able to spend, and so that's what shifted us to upstate New York, Croghan, Lowville, Croghan area, which is where I grew up. So we moved up in '88 when I was 6 years old. Started out with about 70 cows, and then by the time I had left for college, we were at 82 cows. So interesting. It was a big change from Lancaster. The climate was different, and so I think we went through some learning years. We didn't grow the same crops we could grow in Lancaster. But anyway, in all this, I grew up really enjoying farming and and just enjoying the family life on the farm. So I ended up in high school. I was a lot more focused on equipment. I loved running equipment, and so my dad started a harvesting business. So we grew up with a dairy, but then we also had a chopping business where we had dump trucks and chopper, and so we did that through my high school years too. Somewhere along the line, I guess when I would have been 12 years old, we took a big family trip, and this is kind of bigger picture, like what kind of led me to where I was going with farming. But when I was 12, we took a trip up to Alaska, spent the whole summer traveling, and my dad had been a pilot, just a private pilot, and had a plane. And so in the back of my mind, that was always something I wanted to do. And being in Alaska that summer and just seeing all the planes, you know, small Piper Cubs and everything else, kind of put a bug in me that I wanted to fly. So from the time I was 12 to the end of high school, I was kind of set on that's what I was going to college for. I'm going to be a airplane mechanic and I'm going to fly planes. However, my senior year of high school, I applied to college, got into the school I was going to uh, for aviation mechanics and flight, and I realized I was going to leave ag, like that I was leaving ag completely and was going a different direction, and it wasn't sitting well. So kind of last minute, I think it was January, so I put in another application. I applied to a school that had an ag program also. Um, and so that was kind of pivotal for me. Like I had this dream for a long time that I was gonna be in aviation somehow, and just the thought of leaving ag was I just wasn't okay with. So that year, my senior year of high school, I kind of pivoted and decided I was gonna focus on ag. So I went to Berea College in Kentucky. It's a small liberal arts school. They had a small college farm, and going down to that farm, it was a big change from what I had grown up with, where we were farming. You know, dairies through the 90s were continuing to grow. Um, the neighboring dairies around us, one a mile away, I think they started out in '88. They probably had 200 cows, and by the time I left for school, they were at 1,000. The other dairy in '88, they were right around 800, and by the time I left for school in 2000, they were like 4,500 cows. So dairies were just continuing to grow, and I step into Berea College, and it's this little, um, small farm grazing beef with sheep and goats, and it was just a lot different than anything I had done before. And I had a professor there who started just kind of Dr. Pansiera was his name, and he was he was a great mentor the whole way through school, but also was just always kind of mentioning sustainable ag concepts, and just he started getting my head turning a little bit. One about grazing cattle because he knew I was into dairy, and then also just about sustainable ag and soil health and all these things. So those things were already being planted kind of in the back of my head. And after school, I did carpentry just for a couple years till I kind of figured out where I was going. And then I got a job on an organic dairy down in Liberty, PA. And this was actually an organic valley farm. So working in Liberty was kind of my first time we were really grazing cows apart from just pasturing. And one thing that did happen on our home farm through college, we had switched to like 3 times a day and become more intensive. And just the schedule of it was a little hard for me when I'd go home in the summers because it just felt like I was in the barn all day. Where when we were twice a day, I really enjoyed that time through the midday where I was either harvesting crops or working on fence or once we switched to 3 times, it just felt like I was in the barn all the time. So I kind of was just kind of starting to wonder if that was what I wanted to do and the way I wanted to farm. Um, so getting this job on the farm at Liberty kind of just helped me explore like a different way to farm. And it really did. It ignited like a new passion for because I think I was sitting there questioning in those years. I was just recently married. And I was trying to look at the bigger picture and see where I was heading, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for something that intensive. Just the 3 times a day, high production all the time, and I love to be outside, and so being in the barn all the time wasn't wasn't really meeting all my needs. So when I started with this dairy also was like a New Zealand style grazing dairy, and we were seasonal also, which I love to play too. I love to ski. I love recreation. I love doing like just having fun, like taking a break from farming and having fun. So that was good for me. Like through the winter, my wife and I skied a bit, and we were able to do some of the things that we really enjoyed. And then most of the rest of the year, when it was nice, I spent a lot of time outside building fence, moving cattle, and so it definitely reignited a passion for agriculture and especially dairy. Um, and so those were good. Those were good years. Spent 5 years there, learned a lot, and then moved to Alfred, New York, and briefly took a job with Alfred State, starting their organic robotic dairy, and then was there about a year and got an offer from Horizon Organic Dairy up the road, Willow Creek Farm. We're about 120 cow farm, two robots, um, and just a well-run operation. So I worked on two different organic dairies. One, the New Zealand style, um, more low input, and then the other organic dairy I worked on, we were higher production, um, and definitely more, more barns, robots, things like that. It was a more intensive, high production dairy, and thoroughly enjoyed both. So, um, spent 4 years at Willow Creek Farm, and on both of these farms, pretty much since the time I was married, when we started on Provident Farms with the Johnsons down in Liberty, I was looking for ways that we could get into the dairy, into have our own dairy. The goal was to always get our own dairy, and for about 10 years, we just spent, you know, checking out different options of ways we could get in. We were trying to do a cow share um, on Provident Farms, and they decided to exit the dairy industry. The son came home, and they wanted to grain farm instead of do dairy. So when that decision was made, that's when we left. And then with Willow Creek Farms, I think the timing was off. He was not ready to let go yet, and we were ready to have be more than just employees. We wanted cows of our own or equity of our own, and so we weren't really sure. We were just struggling to find a way to get into the dairy industry ourselves, and without somebody backing you, the loans through FSA and everything else just weren't enough to let us get into it um, without another source of income. And at this point, we were starting a family, and my wife wanted to be home with the kids. I wanted to be home with the kids. So her going to work and me farming wasn't really what we wanted to do. So I took a job with Organic Valley after leaving Willow Creek Farms because we just kind of felt we needed to, if we weren't building equity on the farm, we felt like we needed to split and do something else. So I worked with Organic Valley as a regional pool manager for a couple years. Met a lot of wonderful people, met a lot of wonderful farmers, and saw a lot of different operations. I saw things that I liked and were good. I saw things I didn't like and weren't good. And so it helped me formulate, I think, in my mind, how I wanted to have a dairy if I could have my own someday. And I saw things that were working on farms and things that weren't. So it kind of, without any cost, helped me and allowed me to see how we could hopefully be profitable someday on our own farm. And through those years, the 2 years that we were working with Organic Valley, that I was working with Organic Valley, um, a farm came available in my hometown. It was very much what we wanted. Um, it was on a side road. It was like 2 miles from town. Um, I mentioned we like to play and recreate, and so there's a river along the whole back of the property that we can canoe or fish in and have a little camp on. And there was about 90 acres behind the barn that were open and would just be prime grazing ground someday. So we started talking with these farmers, and we're eventually able to work out a deal that we could come in and buy the cows and equipment and then rent the real estate until we were able to purchase it. I guess we set a buyout date at 8 years. So we've been here for we're going on our 6th year now. Um, the first year we came, we put in crops conventionally because it was a conventional dairy. So we put in crops conventionally, and then we started in May of 2019, and our last application of any commercial fertilizer or spray would have been just a few months later. We, as of August 1st, 2019, nothing else commercial fertilizer wise or spray would have gone on the ground. So we started, we bought some cultivators, and I started learning how to row crop organically because the farms I had been on, we had not been row cropping organically. Provident Farms was just getting into it as I was leaving, but I had very little experience. So the first year was definitely a learning curve. And I was really thankful to have, like, through or working for Organic Valley, um, I started keeping in touch with several farmers. Um, and that first spring, or the second, I would have been the second spring when I started cultivating. I'm sending them pictures and saying I'm starting to cultivate, and the one farmer said, "Starting." He looked at the picture and he was like, "You should have started 3 weeks ago," because the weeds were already up, and the timing of everything. I had a lot to learn, but these guys were really good in just helping me navigate and figure out the row cropping system. As was Dave and Caleb Johnson. That was a dairy I worked with in Provident Farms, and I stay in touch with them. So having mentors through that was just super helpful because I had a whole lot of questions, and even with mentors, I learned some things the hard way. But it's been fun. It's been fun learning that. And just after, I guess I had been here a year and a half, I brought my cousin on, and he worked with us, Jesse Beiler, and he kind of more or less took over the row crop, the corn growing, for 3 years, which allowed me to focus more on the cows, which is where I needed to be because doing both, I just couldn't keep up. So we can pause there, Mike, if you have any questions, or I can just kind of keep going a little bit.
Well, I wondered that comment about you should have been in the field a while ago. Is that maybe somebody that I know in Ohio?
Oh yeah, that's Thomas Heckman. One thing I appreciate about Thomas is he's really straightforward, and he'll tell it like it is, like. And so yeah, he's not afraid to call me out on stuff, or yeah, he's helped me a lot. He's been a good friend.
Yeah, it's he is really good at what he does, and he's also very valuable in telling you things that work because he tries different things. So
Yeah.
that's really cool.
No, yeah, it's been and the funny thing is with Thomas, we met at regional meeting one year in Organic Valley. We spent almost no time face to face together, but we stay in good touch and we critique each other and everything else. I don't know, give each other a hard time. It's fun.
And you need that as a young farmer. And that would be one of my questions, Eric, is, you mentioned, your journey connected you with a lot of people that you now use as mentors, but you also mentioned that you saw a lot of things that worked and a lot of things that didn't. And I'm just curious, what are some of those things in your operation now uh, that has, how have you modeled those things in your current operation? What have you chose to follow, and what are the things that you maybe saw and tried and didn't work? Some of those kinds of things.
Okay, yeah, and I apologize. I kind of rambled through like my entire history before stopping and giving you guys
No,
a
that was
chance to ask
fantastic.
questions. But um, so one thing that I learned, I feel like very early on, when I was farming with Dave and Caleb Johnson and going around to some of these conferences, is that some of these things that you're hearing about that people are doing in conferences, and they'll tell you this is the way I'm doing it, and it seems like a great way to do it, um, and it works on their operation. But when you dig deeper and look in some of these people's operations, some of them are not buying the farm. Some of them have generations of wealth right there already, and have a little more financial flexibility than some of the people that are buying the farm outright and starting on their own, like these first generation farmers. And it doesn't make it right or wrong. It just means that it doesn't work for some people that are loaded down with, you know, $8,000, $10,000 debt per cow. You know, you have to be able to generate that income, um, and that gross revenue to make those payments. And so that's one thing. And I'm not saying people can't make it on low production. Um, some of the, but I have to make milk to make my payments. And so when I worked at with Willow Creek Farm in Alfred, New York, in Belmont, right, it's right close to Alfred. Um, One thing I saw is that we made a lot of milk. Um, and we were on robots, but we cycled the cows through and grazed them, brought them back, but we're still able to make a fair amount of milk. Because of that, we were able to buy better equipment. Um, and it just made our lives easier, automate more things. We had a feed pusher. Um, and so I just saw that if I was going to dairy, I wanted to be able to run decent equipment. Um, I wanted to automate things so that my body would not wear out as quickly. And I think that another thing I saw in working for both those dairies, um, was that I needed a break. Going 24/7, um, wasn't what I wanted. People do it, and it's fine but some of that depends on who you are as a person. And I have trouble clocking out when I'm home. Um, my head's in the farming, on the farm. When I leave, I don't think about it. And so it's important for me to be able to leave the farm. And so by working both for on those two dairies, we would have either half the weekend off, or on the secondary, we had a whole weekend off every other weekend. And so being able to afford hired help so that we can get away was something I knew that was going to be important. One, for my family time, but also for kind of my sanity, just to clock out and get away and refresh for a little bit. So we haven't, being early in our years of having our own dairy, we've not been able to do anything like get away half the weekend every weekend, or take off every other weekend. But we've been blessed with really good help and employees that we have been able to get away pretty much since the second year. The first 2 years, we just put our heads down and just worked. But after that, we were able to step away a little. So I guess that's one thing.
So is owning your own farm and running your own farm, was it different than you expected it to be, or was it kind of what you thought you were going to be getting into? Because I know working on a farm and running your own farm is two very different things.
Yeah, it is, Mike. So I think I knew what I was getting into, for the most part. Smaller things on the operation, I think I had some surprises, but um, what we lived out those first couple years, even 3 years, but especially the first couple, was the reason that I spent the years I did trying to get into dairying, into our own farm, somehow differently than just diving in, putting it all at risk, and just working like crazy for however many years it takes. I was hoping that we could like build cows slowly, still have a life, and build equity. Um, it just didn't work out. I know it works for some people to get in that way. Our situations, our scenario, it just didn't really work. And so when I had to make that decision when I was working for Organic Valley, it's like, we're going to put it all on the line, and we're going to do what I've been dreading, the startup of a dairy. Um, and we just did. And it wasn't fun. Like neither of us, my wife or I, really look back on those 2 years and say those first 2 years were a good time. They weren't. I mean, it was exhausting. And just stressful, because we took everything that we had, and we basically used that as a line of credit to get the dairy going. So like, you're watching everything you've worked for. I was 37 when I started. Um, you're kind of we put it all at risk, and so the stress level was high, the stakes were high, right? And not to mention COVID happened like the first year we were in it. So,
That
you know,
added a
which,
whole nother wrinkle.
yeah, especially before we figured out that, um, we didn't know where it was going. Like we knew prices were dropping. You our milk price was dropping on already a very tight budget. Um, and so yeah, that the stress level is high those first 2 years. And I'd say I knew what I was getting into. It was amplified by COVID, and then just amplified by, several things on this farm. Just, I think I expected, I probably had, expectations of things being a certain way. And in reality, I needed to put more work into the equipment than I thought, um, more work into the cows than I thought, things like that. So that stuff just all added up. But looking back, I would still do it again. It just was it was hard. And going through hard things isn't bad. I think it's hard at the time, but I think looking back, like, um, you look at everything you learned, those times really pressure you, and it's not bad. It's just not easy at the time. And I guess your question, Brian, what else have I seen on farms that worked? I guess, some of it was, um, like little things, even just like I think with a dairy farm, um, sometimes in the organic world, we aren't going to follow exactly what, like, um, the conventional dairy industry is doing, because our goals are different, right? And we don't want to have these cows on teeter totters all the time that, um, that's going to force us to use antibiotics, and then we have to get rid of the cow. Um, so I think in all those things, our goals aren't the same, but we still can't ignore, um, all the things that make a dairy, make good quality milk, and make a dairy function well, like using good teat dips, sanitary conditions, all the basic things. I mean, allowable substances that we can use, that even though, yes, the conventional guys use them, it's still really helpful. Like, I use Bovocock a lot. I'm not saying you have to or not, but I give a Bovocock bolus to my cows when they freshen, and it's helped a lot with any milk fever issues. It helps them, just come through that transition stronger. So a lot of those things, even though they're used in the conventional world and they're still allowable organic, I mean, they're good tools. So, and colostrum,
How,
all those things that would come out of, these, um, I guess a lot of things like with calf raising. I can go through a list on every part of your farm.
how many cows are you milking?
So we're milking. We try to run about like 100 through the parlor. I'm a few less right now. I'll be a couple more than that sometimes, but right around 100 going
Okay.
through the parlor. So I didn't, we have not transitioned our cows yet. I know I didn't, I talked to you and Mike about this, Brian and Mike. I talked to both of you guys about this, but, um, before this meeting, but we have only transitioned our land. Um, a couple years ago, organic soybeans were really high price wise, and grain in general. Corn was high too, but especially soybeans. And when I ran the numbers of transitioning my cows, it just was too much risk. And with the pay price, I wasn't gonna gain that much on the other side, because I make a lot of milk. We're actually milking 3 times a day now, um, and we make a lot of milk because the business needs that to pay for everything. So switching to organic, I wouldn't make the same amount of milk. I shouldn't say I wouldn't. I'm not sure I could. I'm pretty sure I couldn't. Um, I think I can still make milk, but just not quite the same. And so when I ran all the numbers, it wasn't quite gonna work. Um, and our business is still, tight enough where there's not a lot of flexibility for mistakes. So, and then I'm pretty land tight, so I can source conventional feed quite easily. There's, numerous smaller dairies in my area that have, sold their cows, and so there's high quality baleage available at a reasonable price. I have been trying to pick up more land, um, and if I can get more land, that's going to help me it's going to help the numbers on the transition make more sense. And then I'm also just finishing up a laneway project and a fencing project, which is also critical. I need, my cows to be able to get out and graze. Currently, my milk cows do not graze. My younger heifers do, and actually my older heifers do also. But we're outsourcing our heifer raising, so that's another area. We just have several areas we have to um, find a solution for, and I don't have a solution, an organic solution right now to raise my heifers, and I don't have a facility to keep them in the winter. And out wintering, I would say, is not the route I want to go up here. Our winters are pretty harsh, and we get a lot of snow. And I have Holsteins. They're not as tough as some others.
When you started what did you say, 6 years ago now? With your experience growing up in the conventional world and seeing the conventional world and then working on organic farms, was it your intention to buy a farm to be organic, or was it that wasn't a drive? You just wanted to be a dairy farmer and whatever avenue to be successful. I'm just curious on the experiences you had. Were you really driving to go organic, and that's a, a factor that you would like to continue to work towards?
It's a good question. Because I think some people would even ask that now because I mean, some local people here would wonder if I'm actually really going organic because when I came in, rumors fly, this guy's going to do it organic, and everybody's watching. We don't have a lot of organic farms around me. I'm in a pretty conventionally farmed area, and so guys were watching me grow corn and make mistakes, which made me feel even, more silly sometimes as I was learning. But yes, my goal was to be organic. And that goes back to when I started at Provident Farms just after being married. I just thoroughly enjoyed grazing cattle and making fence. Um, I remember talking to my wife soon after we were married and working there, and I told her one day, I'm like, and I enjoy hiking. I said, some days I like when I'm building fence, I just feel like I'm hiking all day, and I love it. Like you're out making fence, and it's so peaceful, and I love that work. I love being out. I love grazing cattle, and so that was definitely always the goal that we wanted to switch to organic as soon as we could. Um, and I think it was a little optimistic in how all that would happen. In fact, if you listen to like the regional updates I did, I think we did them in 19 or 20. Um, I had it all planned out. I knew how I was switching. I was going to be 3 years with the crops, and then we're going to get the cows switched right away. And I was actually just going to sell all the cows and buy in an organic herd. Well, I like cows a lot. That's a large part of why I like dairy. And so after I, work with this herd for 3 years, and I'm breeding them the way I want to breed them, and you're seeing results in certain things you're doing, and your kids have cows in the herd. It's a lot easier said than done. I'm not selling this herd and getting another herd. Um, I just I don't want to do that. I'll transition this herd before I buy another herd and bring them in here. You get attached to the cows, and it's just not. I guess I would do that if I absolutely had to, but that is no longer the plan after working with that herd for 3, 4, or 5 years.
And your herd had good genetics when you bought them, kind of the style of cow that you wanted.
So the genetics in the herd was decent. There was definitely some lameness issues going on, and they were a larger framed Holstein. I knew I wanted to have a smaller framed Holstein for grazing. So immediately we started breeding to smaller framed Holsteins. But I calving ease on the herd, and I didn't even know this coming in. Um, this herd calves very easily and has continued to do that, which that's been just a huge perk. I don't have to help much with calvings. We don't have many problems with calvings. So yeah, for the most part, the genetics were there. I just wanted to change the frame size a little bit because we had awful big cows to start with.
So the long-term goal, or if it's possible and it makes financial sense, you would transition the herd to organic is what you're saying?
Yes, that's definitely still the plan. Yep. And I'll stay. I would rather farm conventionally than not farm. I love to farm. I love the work. I love seeing my kids around home. When they're not in school and in the summers. Um, so I'd rather farm conventionally than not farm. But the goal is definitely still to switch everything to organic. And we're making, each year we're taking steps to get closer and closer. Um, like I said, we're starting uh, laneways and fence project, waters in the paddocks, and that'll be on over 100 acres of the farm is going to be fenced. So that'll be a good, uh, at least for the milk cows, that'll be um, plenty of grazing. And then, one of the next things I want to do is try to, and I guess I've been trying all along, just have not been real successful because of, I think in large part the bigger dairies, and I'm not sure why, but guys tend to rent to the bigger dairies. I There was the big dairy up the road was going through an ownership change, and I talked to a landowner, and he said he would rent me the land, and then I'm not sure what happened, but somehow um, the big dairy got it, and I thought if it went anywhere, that we were gonna be able to rent 200 acres just like a mile and a half up the road. But so yeah, land's tough. It's tough to get. Um, it's tough to get land, which is very unlike where I farmed in Alfred and in northern Pennsylvania, because there was so many acres of land you could rent, and up here it's just pretty tight.
Yeah, that 200 acres would have been a game changer. Yeah.
Yeah,
What are
huge.
you currently farming? Is like versus row cropping versus pasture acreage? What's your breakdown of acres farmed?
So I'm farming the real estate that we're on is 200 acres and 150 that's tillable. Um, and I'm cropping right around 230 to 250 acres a year. Um, I have 210 acres every year between my 150 and a 60-acre farm that I rent and have rented since I came, which is also transitioned to organic. That was actually transitioned a year before mine. I was able to transition that a year sooner. So 210 acres set in stone, the same acres every year. There's a neighbor, a next door dairyman. He has trouble keeping up turning his ground over, plowing it and getting it reseeded. And so he'll let me crop anywhere from like 30 to 50 acres a year. So I'll put corn in that 30 to 50 acres a year. But it's moving. That it's always moving from one field to the next, to the next, to the next, which is good because I get the sod benefit for the corn, but it's not like a locked in acreage that I can count on. Um, and then I have about 20 acres of pasture, which my dry cows and heifers go in, and my younger calves, my like 6 month old to yearling calves. And then so I keep a group of 6 month to yearling calves in a small pasture, and it's not managed well or rotated. We just actually got some decent fence up there last spring. We were dealing with barbed wire, but we got some good high tensile fence up there last spring. So that's my small calf pasture, and then I have my dry cow pasture, and then all the other heifers, yearlings up through freshening, um, or springing heifers are outsourced even in the summer now, and they just graze. And again, it's not rotated, but they have a big pasture on a farm about 15 miles away.
You mentioned there's not many organic dairy farms in that area, but are there organic markets available for dairy there?
Yeah, there's definitely markets available. We're a little far away from like upstate Niagara, which they're a big organic player in New York State. Um, so we're a little far away from their organic route to come into the area, but Horizon's in the area. Um, I don't know if Maple Hill is. I don't know of any Maple Hill farms, but there might be. But Horizon Organic Valley are both here. Um, but there's not a lot of farms. It's a smaller group of Amish farms that are in the area. Um, and then a local neighbor here actually just switched to organic, so he's just a few miles up the road. But there's not a lot, it's dominated by conventional dairies. I will say the one unique thing about this area compared to the other areas I farmed is there's a fair amount of farmers that are middle age and younger, farming, which was not at all what I saw in Alfred or Pennsylvania. It was pretty much people late in their careers that were farming still. So that's been it's been nice to have other people my age doing the same line of work, and um, that it's been nice.
You
And
mentioned earlier in the that growing up in that area that some of those farms went from, what would I guess today be considered small to medium size and grew to pretty large. Is that still the makeup of the conventional world, larger farms in the area, or are there some mid to smaller farms and they're just not interested in switching over either?
There are still, so the bigger farms have gotten bigger in this area, but there's a fair amount of farms that are still 70, to 200 cows. Um, However, I've seen a fair amount of them sell out since I've come, just 5, 6 years ago. And their land's getting bought up by these farms that continue to grow. They're just continuing to grow. Like there was uh, a gentleman my age that farms. He had 1,000 cow dairy with his dad. It's been, I'm not sure if it's third or fourth generation by now, but they had 1,000 cows, and they've doubled in size since I came, or maybe more than. They bought a neighboring 500 cow dairy, and then they bought another neighboring 5 to 800 cow dairy. So, and that's what I think, what I'm hearing, we're seeing, at least statewide, that the big farms are buying other big farms and getting larger. Um, but like I said, there's still a fair amount of mid-sized, small, what I would call small farms in this area. There's, um, other young families doing, farming and raising their families the same way, which I think is valuable because your schedules are a lot the same. Um, and there's just other people doing what you're doing, which there's some energy behind that somehow. It's fun, to get ideas off them, and we even equipment share with some, and it's nice to have that community.
is your family's farm in that area, you said?
Yeah, that I sorry, I never mentioned that, Mike. So when I left for school, there my best friend and I did a lot with the custom harvesting business. He left for school a year before I did, and then I left for college, shortly after him, a year later. So all of a sudden, labor became a huge issue for the custom harvesting operation. So a couple years into college, my dad's like, I'm unless you want this, I'm done. Like it's just too much to try to keep this up in the farm. And I said, I knew at that point I wanted to farm more than I wanted to run a custom harvesting business. And so we sold the custom harvesting business. And then I think my dad was just continuing to kind of just be overwhelmed. And he was really ready to be done with the dairy by the time I was just finishing college. Um, and I did not feel ready to just come home and just lock in. Um, I was single at the time, and I just wasn't ready for that commitment level. So he ended up selling the farm. We thought it was going to sell outside the family, and then my brother-in-law and sister, kind of last minute, decided to take over the family farm, which I'm super glad they did. But they are on the home farm, and they're milking about 120 cows with robots, and then they do some grain farming on the side. So it's still an operational farm. It's kind of sandwiched in between some larger dairies. Um, on my side of the river, I have a little less pressure from the big dairies, um, and land rent, but it's still there. The pressure for land is still here, is still high.
And they are conventional, they're not organic.
Correct. Yep, they're a conventional dairy. And the years that I was working on the organic farms, I had talked to him, and we've stayed in good touch through the years, because we were both farming most of those years. And it was just not a step he was interested in taking. Um, and I would say that's Brian, you're asking if if these farms just weren't interested. For one, I'm not sure how much I'm not sure how much they were exposed to it. Like if people ever stopped by, if Horizon or Organic Valley people ever stopped by and just kind of threw the idea. I'm not sure if they ever had the idea or had it proposed to them. But second of all, like even since I've been here, I've mentioned it to a few people, and no one seems real interested. And I'm not sure why. I really don't know why. We do have a good local milk co-op, and maybe that's some of it. We know we weren't bought out by any of the big guys yet. Right, and we have a plant right here, 15 miles from my house, where cream cheese is made. Um, so I'm not sure what that is, but I don't see many people interested in farming organically.
And yeah, that's kind of where my question was coming from, Eric, was because I mean, been throughout other parts of the country too, and there's definitely those pockets that are still pretty strongly conventional with, what would be small to mid-sized farms that, and historically would be right in the wheelhouse of organic, especially with the big farms that you're mentioning putting pressure on and being competition for not only milk price but also for land, and that in some parts of the country has been a driver for folks to go organic. But it just seems here in the last 5 years, and I think you're kind of hitting on it with your own farm's consideration for going organic, is that milk production wise, genetics wise, price wise, the gap is definitely narrowed. And also with the pressure, well, you mentioned the COVID years and the struggles that happened through there, as well as some of the really good prices that happened through that time as well in the conventional world. There's a level of risk that a conventional farm is willing to take, and I think for some, a 3-year transition just seems to be too much. You're putting too much at risk with what would be for them an unknown. So that's just, I was kind of curious if you had some of those conversations to understand a little bit more of what could be in the wheelhouse of interest in organic just isn't there as much anymore.
Yeah, I think you're right with that, Brian, that there is this big unknown. And it's one thing if you're just grass farming and you aren't changing a lot. And I don't mean just grass farming. I mean that's how we farm in Alfred and in Pennsylvania. Um, it's a great way to farm, but your transition costs are less. So many of these farms up here, they're planting at least half of their forage going to their cows as corn silage.
Mhm.
So, I mean, from my experience, it's a lot more challenging to raise organic corn than it is to grow organic grass. I mean, not much changes. You can get some, soil amendments and chicken litter or however you choose to fertilize even just your cow manure, and still raise really high quality grass feed or alfalfa. With row cropping, it's just a whole different tool set and way of doing things, I guess, and unknown, just like you said.
And the other thing too, and I've experienced this with a couple of farmers that have gone from conventional confinement, and like you mentioned, growing a lot of their feed as a lot of their forage feed as corn silage, which can get the tonnage, and switching over to organic. The one thing that we've mentioned here that you've had experience with, but a lot of these farmers that would be conventional haven't, is grazing. And the one farmer I'm thinking of in Michigan, that was a far bigger hurdle and risk that he took to learn, and not only he himself had to learn how to manage a grazing dairy, but the animals had to learn how to harvest their own feed. And that's a pretty big hurdle, not just the changing of the way that crops are grown, but what I've experienced is that transition from not grazing to grazing is actually bigger than some of the row crop changes you have to make to go organic.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't necessarily think about that, but that is a big deal, and it is that's another unknown for a lot of people. Actually, the previous owner, he knew I wanted to do things a little different and kept kind of probing me about this grazing thing. And he's like, boy, you think you want to let them outside? And he's like, and kind of to him, the worst thing you can do for a dairy cow is let her out. If you want to hold production, is to let her outside and let her eat grass and do it on her own, but it's just a very different mindset. And um, he had moved away from that and saw milk production go up. And um, so for him to see me going back to that, but doing it very differently, I think that's the part he didn't understand. Like my cows are going to rotate it through and it's going to be harvested like a crop. It's just that they're going to do it.
And I think when you look at the last 50 years of dairy, when they've really brought the cows inside, they're trying to control every aspect of the environment they possibly can. And with grazing, it looks scary because you are now opening yourself up to weather, to all those types of stuff that you can control a little bit better if they're in the barn. And, going back to how Grandpa used to do it looks really scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think some of the mindset is we're going back on all these innovations and all these advancements that we've made, and now it's like we're throwing that out the window, and it's not necessarily true, because you had mentioned early on that in the conventional world there's a lot of tools there that organic dairy has a lot more similarities to conventional than differences. It's not that much different. A cow's still going to need X amount of dry matter to make milk. It's just
Exactly.
the feed is going to be feed. It's just organic feed. And, you don't necessarily have to sacrifice production, especially during the winter months. You probably will sacrifice a little bit if you're a high production herd during the grazing season. But the winter shouldn't be much different, you wouldn't think.
Correct. And I also think even if production goes down in the summer, you have to figure the fuel savings of harvesting feed and hauling manure, and even larger, the health benefits of the cattle. But there's something about grazing cows and having them out, um, just them moving that much, definitely foot health, um, is just good for cows.
And I think we've seen that on Thomas Heckman's farm, with his grazing. Um, he might have lost a little bit of production when he got more serious about grazing, but the bottom line changed for the better too.
Yeah. Yep.
You mentioned earlier that you have a river running along the back of your farm.
Yeah. Yep.
So is that like a salmon river?
No, we're not. You got to go about an hour away to get to where the salmon run up
Shoot,
here. But
I thought we had a connection, Brian.
you, you're welcome to come up here and stay, and then you can just drive an hour away and salmon fish. We've gone up there when other friends came in the area, and we're salmon fishing in Pulaski. Pulaski is where most of these people were. They call it Salmon River, Pulaski. So, but yeah, no,
I
we do
actually,
with the river. Our hope is to. This is a long way. Again, I think it was a little bit optimistic in how quick I could do all these things. Right. By now, if you ask me when I started, I was gonna be irrigating pastures out behind my barn. We're not there yet, right? It takes longer than you think sometimes. But the goal would be, I'm on pretty sandy ground, so my goal would be to irrigate paddocks out of the river. Because what I see on years where we have rain, I can make a lot of feed. On years where it doesn't rain, we dry up pretty quick.
and you are basically due east of Lake Ontario, right?
Yeah, southeast a little, yep, a little bit south
Southeast.
too. Yep.
And you get just absolute insane amount of snow, don't you?
Yeah, we get winter when it's winter. And I actually really enjoy the snow. So there's times where like when it comes in large amounts, like it just did in Thanksgiving, we had I think about 48 inches in 36 hours. So when it comes all at once like that, it definitely makes some more work. Um, but I really do enjoy having snow on the ground all winter. Um, we like to ski. A lot of our world's consumed by hockey now because my young kids are in hockey. We like winter sports. It's kind of our time to slow down a little bit. Summers are so busy with cropping and the farm and everything else. In the winter, we can do chores and have some fun.
I think growing up on a farm is the best way to grow up. but you also can't be so busy that your kids resent the farm. So
Yeah,
having
the
time,
delicate balance.
yeah, you know, having chores and everything for kids is so valuable, but if that's all you do, um, you know, that's not good either.
Yeah, yep. Especially when, both my wife and I like those same things. We don't mind working, but we wanna go out and recreate some too.
I just got a little bit sore imagining me going out and playing hockey again.
I just played for the first time last week, and I'm still sore.
Oh, the first week of playing is so brutal because you're
Yep,
using muscles that you just normally don't use.
exactly. Yeah, I move all day on the farm, but when you go out and do that, it's definitely, you find out there's muscles you weren't using.
Hmm. Well, Eric, this is really good conversation here. I really enjoyed it. I'm so happy for you and your family that you have your own farm there. This is exciting. Um, I just recently, Martha and I moved to a farm as well, and
Great.
there's just something about sitting there with some acreage around you that's pretty awesome. And I'm so happy for you that you have this opportunity. So thank you so much for joining us. This was great to catch up.
All right, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thank you.